Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hello, everyone.
And Alex.
I'm here.
And we have a very special guest today joining us. It's Toni Clark from Assure Women's Center. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So we'll get into your introduction in a moment, but first we want to let people kind of know who you are just a little bit by asking you 3 questions. We ask these same questions of all of our guests. They're not too stressful. The first question is, have you ever had a nickname? And if so, what was it? Or is it?
Well, actually, Toni is my nickname.
Oh, okay.
My birth given name is Antoinette, and very few people know that, but Toni is my nickname, and that's it.
And it just stuck.
It's 2 weeks in a row for our listeners keeping score of people who actually go by their nickname.
Oh, yeah.
Katie did last
so
week
much
too.
it got me in trouble last week.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I was filling out financial paperwork, and they had me as Toni, and they said, "This is your social security number." I'm like, "Yeah, it is." But,
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I forgot my name is Antoinette.
Confusing people. Yeah, it is hard.
All right. The second question. If you had a warning label, what would yours say? So if it said, warning, Toni might do this, may do that.
Let me think. Probably warning. Toni is very vulnerable sometimes. I might cry.
Okay, that's good to know.
That is a good warning.
That's a good warning. All right, one more. What's the last book that you read?
This morning, my Bible.
That's good.
There you go. I hear that's a good book.
It is. The best.
Bestseller even. So Toni, why don't you give us just maybe a brief introduction of who you are and kind of what you do at Assure, and maybe what your role is there, and a little bit about Assure Women's Center.
Awesome. Yeah, I am executive director for Assure Women's Center. We used to be called AAA Center for Pregnancy Counseling. Many people in the city still know us by that name. I've been executive director for about 8 years. I started off there as a speaker in the schools. We have speakers that are in the schools that are talking about healthy relationships and abstinence. So that's how I started with Assure. And our desire is just to be that first step for those young ladies who are facing unplanned pregnancies. We want to just come alongside them and really address the fears that they have. Fear of losing boyfriend, fear of losing scholarships, fear of being put out by parents. We want to just come alongside them and answer those fears that they have and give them really hope for the future for them and their baby. And we do that by addressing those physical, spiritual, and emotional needs that they have. So Assure has been around for 34 years. As like I said, started out as AAA, and we have 3 centers, 2 in Omaha, 1 in Council Bluffs, and God has just really favored us with His favor in the community, around the nation. We're training centers with our patient process. He's just been a tremendous blessing to us.
Cool. That's good. Tell us a little bit about the marketing strategy for it, because I know I was looking into it and I was just kind of testing it out. Like if I typed in, abortion Omaha, you were on the first page. Mm-hmm. So give us a little insight to your strategy and how you're trying to reach people.
Good question. Well, we're a traditional pregnancy center. We provide, pregnancy services, which include pregnancy tests, ultrasounds, information about options. We have a parenting class, all those things. But a few years ago, we just felt like we were missing that young lady who was most at risk for abortion, that one that feels like I don't have any other hope. And so we just began to pray and ask God, how do we reach that young lady? And we found a center that had done a lot of research on what a girl needed to make a life decision. And part of that was just addressing the questions that she had. Every young lady, regardless of the decision that she makes, needs to have some questions answered. She needs to know if she's pregnant, how far along she is. The other things that she needs to know, does she have an STD? Is it a viable pregnancy? And so those are the things that we answer in our advertising, but those are the things that most girls are looking for. Am I pregnant? And so we spend nice portion of our budget marketing trying to reach that one young lady who was the most at risk for abortion. And so we will find her where she is by answering those questions that she has. And then once we get her to hear, this is a place you can come and have those answers answered for free. You can find, you can have an ultrasound, because sometimes the ultrasound is what's needed to know how far along you are, once again, before you make any decision. So our advertising is very strategic for that young lady who thinks she has no other choice, and we're answering the questions that she needs to have answered even before she makes a decision.
Yeah, that's so important too, because I think you were helping Pastor Mark a few weeks ago. That's where we got to first meet, shape his message for this Sunday, this last Sunday, when we talked and addressed the issue of abortion and what the Word of God says about it, how we respond, and just people that have had abortions in the past, and how we can shepherd those. But I thought one of the things that was very interesting to me as you were talking about that was, if our listeners love KGBI and, radio stations that are the typical Christian radio stations, they might not have ever heard about, a Sure Women's Clinic, or if you're not searching, just abortion on Google, or am I pregnant all the time, then you probably may have never heard of you guys as a resource, but you're trying to reach people maybe that aren't in the Christian bubble, but people that are out there that are maybe listening to radio stations, looking for hope, panicking about what decision I'm going to make. Do I have an STD? All those kind of things, which is usually not what we consider our family-friendly radio stations, right?
Absolutely. I often tell people, if you hear one of our ads, I'm a little concerned about what you're listening to, because our target audience is that 17 to 24-year-old. She's the one that's most at risk. She's in high school, she's in college, just starting a new job, and she's the one that's at that point of decision. And so we do advertise on radio stations that they listen to. We use the Google AdWords that they would be researching, and we actually work with an advertising company to come up with those AdWords, and we have a strategic plan that we work with them so that they are helping us to reach the young ladies that we need to reach. So you're right. It's not. We don't advertise on KGBI for that young lady who's seeking an abortion. The other thing I'd say, the reason we advertise the way we do is we want to eliminate any barrier that she has from coming into our door. And so quite often, if a church perhaps has our name on a website, because they'll Google Assure, and if Assure comes up on 10 different church websites, that young lady already knows that we have an agenda, and then she's not going to come to us. So it's not unheard of that I would call a church and say, hey, can you take our name off your website and perhaps use our logo? Logos are not necessarily searchable, but Assure Women's Center certainly would be. We just want to eliminate the barriers for those young ladies to come in, because if they don't come to us, then we don't have a chance of rescuing her or her baby.
Do you ever have someone who comes in and maybe is upset because they felt like they were coming in for one thing and maybe felt like when they came they didn't get the answer they were expecting, or anything like that? I
think that's the typical bait and switch.
Yeah.
No, we do not bait and switch. One of the things that we do to make sure we tell them on the appointment line what they can expect when they get there. They know that we don't perform or refer for abortions. That's one of the things. Even if they say, I'm looking for an abortion, well, we don't refer or perform abortions, but there's some information you need to know prior to you making a choice. And then when they come in, that's the first step. We'll greet at first, but then they're given a list of what they can expect while they're there. Every blue moon, there's a young lady who has not heard that. And I just think that's just the power of denial. We know what's said on the helpline, on the scheduling line, but sometimes they hear what they want to hear. So very rarely does it happen. Can I say never? No, I can't say that, but very rarely, because we're very, very upfront. We don't perform or refer for abortions. We're not going to give you an ultrasound that has your name and date. We won't even do that. So
I think when anytime this topic comes up, it's very sensitive. People are very outspoken with their opinions on it. And if you were to go to your website, there is a drop down menu there that has different options. One says abortion. Have you ever, as Assure, ever come under attack wrongfully because people thought that's what you did there, or is that a thing that happens or not?
Good question. Yeah, unfortunately, we have once again. I have had many conversations with. I think the pastors now in the city know. The churches know, but we've gotten a call or two from a pastor where I was going to speak, and they said, "Well, pull up your website, and it talks about abortion." We actually had a speaker that was coming in for one of our banquets that I don't think she had looked at the website at all, and so she's on the plane, called her assistant, and said, "This place does abortions," And no, we don't. But once again, that's information that she's looking for. Yeah. And so we address the elephant in the room. This is what abortion is. We talk about adoption. We talk about all those things. But once again, it's just we're reaching her where she is. And she has a question about abortion. And so we're going to answer it with the truth.
Yeah. That's good. So I did student ministry for like a decade. And one of the things that I always ran into with parents is every parent's like, my kid would never be your client or whatever. My kid would never look at porn. My kid would never be any of the problems that we say are in the world. And I've got, 3 daughters, and I want to think my kid would never be searching for this kind of stuff. But I think a lot of that's built on stigmas and generalizations and just unhealthy knowledge of people and just our ignorance. And so, you talked about this a little bit earlier, but what's your typical client look like? I think sometimes there's socioeconomic barriers that we think, or why are you spread throughout the city? Why not just in one place in the city? So describe kind of, I guess, what the typical gal or your client, even if it's, a guy that is reaching out wanting information, what do they look like? Can you just categorize them and stereotype them or not?
Absolutely no, you cannot. Honestly, we see a variety of patients. There's no typical patient. We've seen them as young as, I hate to say, 10, as old as 50. We see some that are married, some that are newly married, some that we're actually seeing more married couples. It's just inconvenient.
Wow.
So whereas our target audience is at 17 to 24. There's some that fall on either side. Speaking of church, I can't tell you the number of times that someone has come in and said, "Hey, there's a young lady here from your church. Can you close your door?" So I think all of us at some point have run into someone we know, whether it's someone's kid, that's one of our friends' kids. So there is no typical patient, which kind of goes back to wanting to just eliminate the barriers. And I believe those girls that have come in from different church, from my church or from wherever, girls that are close, perhaps my daughter's best friend, they know it as a safe place. And they know that they can come, they'll receive the truth, they'll be treated with love. But then the other thing, too, everything is confidential. And so we wouldn't go back. And there were some times for me where I know, I could tell someone's been there, but I can't do that, and I wouldn't. And so the girls feel like it's a safe place, and we try to maintain that with them.
Good. So what are like the stories that they come in with? I think it's not like when you're born and you're thinking about what you want to do in life, that this isn't like usually probably on a lot of people's bucket lists, to even come into an appointment with you guys and think about abortion. But then there's real pressures and fears that drive, I think, a lot of women, especially younger women, and that we maybe don't understand. I think sometimes as Christians, we're like, this is just evil, and we label it that, but then we don't really understand the real pressures that build some empathy in us for what would even drive someone to even contemplate a decision like that.
If you can think of a story, we've probably heard it. I think of a couple that I've just heard within the last couple of weeks. We had a young lady that came in, was 15. She had a baby already, and her mom said if she kept this baby, she'd be on her own. So now you have this 15-year-old who doesn't necessarily want to have an abortion, but mom says if you don't, you're on your own.
Homeless.
So where does this 15-year-old go? Then we have, once again, patients that come in newlyweds. They've happily married or just got married, great jobs. It's just inconvenient. It's not what we were planning. You just don't know. Then we will, from time to time, we'll get one. Even just recently, we had a patient that came in. Her baby was younger than 1. And I don't know that I can, handle another infant with the 1 or 2 that I already have. So if you can think of it, we have probably heard that story. But those are 3 that we hear pretty constantly, and we just heard those same stories. And try not to look at it as the same old story, because that's her story.
Yeah.
That's her heartache. That's her dilemma. And so even though we hear it often, perhaps the same pattern of story is individual to that young lady.
That's so good. And I think a lot of times as older people, or whatever that means, but we think of someone else's life and like, how could that really be a real pressure, for a high school girl? What do you mean? I've got all this job and I've got all these real problems in my life. How could just losing your boyfriend, he's a jerk anyway? Or how could losing a $500 scholarship, or some of these things that we look at as like, that's not that big of a deal. No. Just do the right thing. But when you're in the middle of that is the biggest deal in the world. And so, I think having an understanding for people in the church and an empathy for that is huge.
I think the story close to me was there was a woman who's pregnant. Her boyfriend says, well, if you love me, you'll get rid of the baby, and I think it's one of those things where hearing the story as an outsider, you go, well, that's just ridiculous. But I think when you're that person and you love this other person, and then like, how do you talk them through that? Like, how do you reach a point where it's like, no, you got to understand that isn't love.
Yeah. A relationship of a person you love and know now getting cut off by a potential relationship. That's hard.
Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of our patient process. I didn't really talk about it a lot, but we have a 15-step patient process that really addresses everything from getting them into the door to that follow-up. What do they do after they leave? And part of that process is just really just taking the focus off of everything else that's going on and focusing on the problem that she has. We have an hour with her to talk about the problem that she has. Now, she may come in with a lot of other things, boyfriend issues, housing issues, and those things. And it could be really easy for her to allow the appointment to go her way. And that would be a patient-driven appointment where we're kind of following her wherever she goes. Our approach is a problem-centered approach where we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about the problem that she potentially has, and that's that unborn baby. And now, not that those other things are not important. We will address those after, we'll give her referrals, or, we'll talk about that next. But the first thing we need to do is allow her to see this unborn baby, allow her to hear the ultrasounds, to hear that heartbeat, and help her to realize this is not just a big problem that you can erase. This is a life that you're carrying. So our process kind of addresses that, just to kind of help her to focus, laser focus on helping her to see that baby as a baby. And then we address those other issues with her. And sometimes a woman just needs a little time to process. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say, so most of the time throughout that process, where's the moment that most people decide, oh, wow, maybe I want to change my mind about something?
I would say it would probably be the ultrasound room.
Okay.
We call that our miracle room. And so by the time they get to the ultrasound room, we've talked about all the options. We've talked about what kind of support she has, whether it's support to end the pregnancy or whether it's support to continue the pregnancy. At that point, we've already shared the gospel with her. She's found out if she's pregnant. So when she sees that ultrasound, sometimes it's a matter of what I've been told, the lies perhaps that I've been told. Now I'm facing the reality of truth. One story that comes to mind happened a little while ago, but it just bears repeating. A young lady and her cousin had come in, and typically the patient is by herself for some time, and then we'll bring her guest in the room with her. But this young lady wanted her cousin to be with her. And so we got to the point where she saw the ultrasound, and when they see the ultrasound, because we can determine how far along she is based on the ultrasound and her last menstrual period, whatever. And so we get a chance to give her just a model of the baby at the size that the baby is. And this young lady began to cry along with her cousin. And they said they didn't know that babies this side had hands and feet like little people. So now you're confronted with, you've been told this is a blob. You've been told that it's not a baby yet. But when you see that ultrasound and we hear that heartbeat, reality sets in. The truth of the matter is, it is a baby. So I'd say most people will probably change once they see the ultrasound. We get some girls that perhaps have been there before. I don't want to see it. I don't want to take a picture, because now once again you're confronted with the truth, and the truth doesn't need to be propped up. It doesn't need to be, we don't have to lie about it. It's right there to see. It's right there to hear. So I think that's where most young ladies would make that change.
Yeah. I feel like this is such a personal topic, and I feel like maybe, especially in college, I've had this situation where maybe I've interacted with some people who talk about getting abortions, or they would go and get abortions. If you have a friend that is kind of in this situation, what would you recommend you do to help them along this process? Because I feel like you don't want to kind of step on their toes because it is their body, their choice, kind of thing. But you also want to help them get the knowledge and understanding. So what would you do if your friend was in this situation?
So what I typically tell people, use this as a resource. So if she says, hey, I took an at-home pregnancy test and I'm pregnant, and so I don't know what I'm going to do. We'll say, well, do you know how far, some of the same questions that we asked, do you know how far along you are? Do you need help making the decision? Well, let's make an appointment at Assure, because we can give you an ultrasound to find out how far along you are. We can give, a pregnancy test that will confirm the pregnancy, those things. So just using Assure as a resource. And what I often say is, you get them in the door, we take care of the rest. Yeah. So the thing is just getting them in.
Yeah.
Is there cost involved in this?
No, all of our services are free and confidential to her, so at no cost to her.
Yeah, which is huge, because
absolutely,
that's expensive. Things to get an ultrasound, to get all that. It's an expensive step for anybody, I think. So
yes. So if she were to go to someplace else, she'd have to pay for an ultrasound. Now, with that being said, she cannot take our ultrasound to, say, I won't name any places, but she can't take our ultrasound to an abortion facility and say, here's the size of my baby. But we do allow her to see it. So she takes a picture, but it doesn't have any information, identifying information that would say this is her baby.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I agree that being a dad, 4 times, that the first time, you do pee on a stick, you do all that, stuff. Your wife comes in and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant, or, whatever it looks like for people. And I wasn't like in denial. I mean, we were excited and things like that, but there's that moment, where you hear that thump, 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 and you hear those things that it becomes real. You just can't deny it at that point. And not that we were trying to, but there's just this crazy, miraculous, undescribable thing that happens in that moment that I think, that's crazy.
That's always our prayer. We, as a staff, we pray every day at noon for our patients and just different things. And I just always pray that the image that they see on the ultrasound and the heartbeat that they hear speaks more volume to them than the circumstances that are around them. I pray that they don't forget what that heartbeat sounds like, and they don't forget the image of the ultrasound, which is so important that they want to take that picture with them. And so you're right. There's a moment when you go, this is beyond me. So.
What do you do when someone comes to you that they've already had an abortion, and they're like, well, I've been through this before. I kind of know what to expect. This is what I want. I made up my mind. And even beyond that, like, how can we react to people that maybe we've encountered, or friends or family who have had it, or maybe they've finally confessed it to us? Like, how do you handle that and process it?
I think first and foremost, prayer. And I say from a standpoint of, okay, God, give me what to say. I'm sure we've all been in situations where something is, right there, and you're like, okay, what do I say? Instantly, God, give me what to say instantly, because I don't know what she needs for me to minister to her. But I guess practically, it's got to be tough to talk a young lady out of something that she's already, if she doesn't think there's anything wrong with it. I've heard, just because it's legal doesn't, I think Pastor Mark said that Sunday, just because it's legal doesn't make it moral. And so we're dealing with something that's legal in our state, and getting someone to realize that it's a moral issue. It's going to take time. So I would say just love on them. What we do with our follow-up process, if we discover a young lady has had an abortion, we'll ask those questions. How are you feeling? Long story short, we're getting to a point whether she feels like, I'm hurt by this, and then we'll offer our post-abortion trauma Bible studies. But often that doesn't come way down the line. I'm talking 10, 15, 20 years when someone realizes, man, that abortion I had when I was 16, 17 has been haunting me. And now I'm in my late 20s and 30s, and just figuring out that that's what it was. So studies will show that the majority of those that feel like they are struggling with an abortion decision comes later in life. And then when that happens, then we can offer those Bible studies. We want people to be healed, delivered, and set free from the guilt and shame of their past. And I think it's important that we remind people of God's forgiveness and God's grace.
That's so good. Today, we've had people reach out to us on social media from a church we had a powerful woman share her testimony at our service on Sunday about having 3 abortions a long, time ago. And that really, I think, sparked it's something we don't talk about in the church. And even for people that have, it's one of those things that the church says, don't do it. And so somebody that maybe has feels like I can't let that out, because how am I going to be perceived? And I talked to a gal on the phone today for 40 minutes that saw that, and it brought up all these emotions and pains, people that want to come to this class that Barbara's leading over the next few weeks. And so it's hard. It's been a part of, people that are in my family that are close to me, and just that healing process, the shame, what Satan wants to keep it silent.
Absolutely.
Then he can wreak havoc in somebody's life and continue to drive shame. And so there's freedom inside of that, voicing it, being able to find freedom. And so that's so powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's just important for us as a body of Christ to remember that there's no sin that's greater than another. And we don't talk about it a lot. And unfortunately, once again, statistics would bear that the number of abortions inside the church are the same as outside. And so it does occur, unfortunately. For whatever reasons, it's there, it happens, and we do need to address it. So I'm just really grateful for your church just taking that bold stand. I think Pastor Mark did a wonderful job, phenomenal job Sunday, broaching the subject, and even this podcast, because that's what the enemy wants. He wants us to keep quiet, keep shame, and us not to live those fulfill lives. And by exposing the enemy, then he can't hold it over your head.
Amen. That's good.
I think one big conversation around this is adoption. Why people are like, well, why don't they just put their child up for adoption? That would be the easiest choice. Can you help us kind of get a better perspective and understanding of your clients and maybe what they're going through as they're deciding, and maybe why they don't decide to do adoption?
Well, that's the other part of our prayer. We always pray for a spirit of adoption. Unfortunately, I believe adoption just comes from a center of loss. And so when you think about sometimes the young ladies who are perhaps facing these unplanned pregnancies, many come from broken homes. And I know foster care is not the same as adoption. But if you're coming from a background where you don't have a good home life, that's all you have to think about. And so it's easier for me to eliminate this than to perhaps put my baby in a situation that could be worse than what I grew up in, that kind of thing. So it is I believe it's from a center of loss, and not necessarily thinking about this could help someone. And then the other thought is, why would I carry a baby for 9 months and give it away? They're not thinking about the fact that it could bless, a family that's been trying to get pregnant for years. It's a selfless act to place a baby for adoption, but they don't see it as that. I think in some terms they almost feel like it's selfish for me to carry this baby and give it away, because now that baby won't know their parents, and what kind of life is that baby going to have. Yeah. So we would love to see more adoptions. Unfortunately, we just don't.
Well, and it's not a walk in the park to be pregnant. To
Absolutely.
be pregnant and carry a baby for 9 months. It's not easy or glamorous. It's hard. And then to do all that work, to put all that pain on your body, and then not really, have that and have that baby and then give it to someone else. It would feel, I'm sure, just hard. I know part of my family story is there was a girl who became my oldest sister. My parents adopted. She was pregnant. Her family said, abort the baby or we're kicking you out of the house. And so my parents were like, we're not going to let this happen, and invited her to stay in our house, live with us. My mom was actually pregnant at the same time as this teenage girl. So my youngest brother and then my first niece now, because we adopted the gal, are the same age and both going through pregnancy at the same time. Young teenage girl. My mom, it was a wild time. I was only 6, so I don't remember all that. But it started this whole process of knowing someone that's there that you trust and having a relationship where you can have that as an option versus just a random person. So I think relationship plays a huge role in that support and care too. So
I think one of the things that we've heard and experienced after this past Sunday with this message that Pastor Mark delivered is there still seems to be some people who are kind of on the fence, or they're like, hey, you know what? I'm so pro-choice. This doesn't I mean, I've heard these facts before. That doesn't change my mind. I'm sure that you've had to have debates with people, and I guess it's not about winning that argument, but what are some practical ways to just kind of let people know they're heard, but also like how can we kind of walk alongside them and maybe point out like some inaccuracies in what they believe?
It's a good question. And I'm not the great debater. That's just not my nature. But I just feel like it kind of goes back to relationship. And so if I have a different opinion from you, and if I am constantly bombarding you with you're wrong, you're never going to listen to me. Whereas if I can talk to you as a friend, perhaps use, Bible verses, Psalms 139, there are a number of pro-life Bible verses that we can use, but that discussion has to be had at the friendship, at the relationship level. It can't be a yelling. And so I do think it takes time. I do think it's something that you'd have to invest just being vulnerable with that person and saying perhaps, I don't know all the answers that you questions that you perhaps have, but this is how I feel. And just being able to keep those lines of communication open and just praying that God will continue to soften their heart, that they will begin to hear what you're saying. And that can only be done in a quiet way, not a yelling way. If people yell at you, you don't hear anything they're saying because you just want them to shut up. But if you're doing it in a loving way, this is how I feel. And we can agree or disagree, and we'll have these conversations from time to time. I believe people can be won over.
Yeah, I think the prayer part is huge, because I think we easily think that we're the people who are going to convict other people of what they're doing. And that's just not going to happen. It's got to be the Holy Spirit, and that's got to be what happens. So I think we just have to let go of control, which is hard sometimes, and let God work, and just pray about that. So I think that's really good advice. And
I think there's just lingering effects, part of the sin nature of people, that even if we abolish, which I think would be great if, it got abolished, abortion in our country, there's still going to be lingering effects of what that looks like and new challenges that come along with that. The abolishment of slavery, it doesn't mean that there was no pains, there's not struggles that our country still has, between African Americans and white people and all that. There's still wounds that we have to continue to heal. And so I think sometimes we're like, if we just abolish it, it got rid of it, but I think it takes people that are willing to love, not just, hey, let's get rid of this problem and let's get rid of abortion and outlaw it. Let's vote for that, which is great. Okay, vote your conscience, all those things. But what are you going to do? Absolutely. How is your life going to change? How are you going to open your home? How are you going to open your checkbook? How are you going to open your heart for these people that need love? They need to be cared for. They need a home if that's not a possibility. So I think a lot of times we dream of this ideal world where abortion isn't even an option anymore, but then now you're the option. Absolutely. So what are you going to do about that? And how are you prepared to change your life, not just your vote, based on something like that? And I think that's a real awakening that I think the church would need to have in the wake of something like that.
It's kind of the matter of putting your money where your mouth is. When you think of, I think sometimes maybe people from the secular world will think of a Christian and the abortion issue, and they just immediately think, oh, like the person with the sign at the abortion clinic who's protesting, and it's like maybe that may not always be the best route, because here you have, like we've talked about today, these women coming in this very vulnerable position, and you just standing there yelling at them with a sign is not going to reach them, or something like Assure is a way for them to get the facts that they need and get the information that is important to them. And sometimes I think that's hard, because we just want, when it's just an argument about being right, the love isn't there, right? The love for those people isn't there.
And I think that's where Assure comes into play. We do want to create that environment where she's feeling loved. We figure, I just feel like by the time a young lady comes to us, she's been deceived, she's been tricked, she's been lied to, she's been misused, mistreated, and she doesn't really know her value. She doesn't know her worth. And so, yes, we do have an agenda. We want her to choose life with the unborn baby, but we just feel like if you can love on her, you can give her the information that she needs in a non-judgmental fashion, calm her fears, just kind of relax her and let her know we're here for you. Then we have a chance of potentially tearing down those walls that would cause her to end her pregnancy and abort her baby. But we can't do that, shouting at her and yelling at her. We have to show her love. We have to treat her with respect. So one of the reasons that we operate the way we do with appointments is because we want her to feel honored when she comes in. We want her to feel like she matters. Our doors are locked. They're not locked because we're afraid of the neighborhood. They're locked because we want to protect her. If there's somebody that she doesn't want to come in, they don't get in because she is our priority. She is our main focus. And I think that's how we reach them, just by showing them that we love you. We're concerned about you. Yes, we're going to give her the truth while she's there, but you are our first priority because we can't reach that baby if we don't reach her.
So good. So good.
Yeah.
So if someone's in the middle of this right now, they're listening and they're in the middle of a crisis, or they know someone that's in the middle of it, what's the best way to find you guys? What's the best way to just take a step forward, make an appointment, all these things that you've described?
Well, we have 2 websites, but if someone is in crisis, if they just Google Assure, we should pop right up. Probably if they Google abortion, we should pop right up as well. But our appointment phone number is 402-397-0600.
Awesome.
But the best, I think most people find us via web. They're Googling. And then from there, they would call and make an appointment. I would say if people want to find out more information about Assure and how they can plug in, then that would be our partner website, which is not searchable. You'd have to type it in a URL. That's something that's one of the ways that we try to stay off the radar for young ladies to find out, our agenda, if I can say that. And that website is firststeptolife.com. So I would say most of your listeners would probably fall into that category where they would want to go to firststeptolife.com to learn more about Assure, how they can plug in, how they can come for a tour. Our newsletters and those things are at that firststeptolife.com website. But just for an average patient, AssureOmaha.com is the website.
So it comes to mind a friend of mine who has a story of kind of redemption from like when his mom was pregnant with him. Her mom told her she needed to get an abortion, and that's kind of part of his life story. Like, if she would have done that, I wouldn't be here. But she was brave enough to make a decision on her own outside of her parent or her parental influence. And I think if someone were to be Googling stuff about abortion and they stumbled across this episode, and they are underage, then they maybe do have a parent who's influencing them in a way that's like, hey, you need to get an abortion. Is it okay for them to reach out to you? Is that something that you guys can handle in a way that works with their parents and that sort of thing?
Absolutely, they can. Once again, our services are confidential. And so if someone came, which we do get young ladies in that, I'll say younger teens, that come in without their parents, we don't notify their parents. We do have a policy in place. If a young lady states that she's being forced to have an abortion, we have a policy to handle that as well. I don't want to say what it is, but we do have a policy for that as well. So if someone comes in and we feel like she's being coerced into an abortion, we will follow our procedures.
That's good.
For that.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. I was reading in scripture today and came across really exciting times, not really, but when Jesus was being crucified. And I was reminded of just this topic today when he was hanging on the cross next to 2 thieves, and he just looked down with compassion at these people that are crucifying him and said, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. And I think that's probably the story of a lot of people that are walking into this, and that we have a God who, while he was going through the worst pain of his entire life, is doing it to offer forgiveness, because we're people that are just ignorant. We don't know what we're doing. We don't know the pain it's causing. We don't know that it's even sin sometimes. They had no clue, and yet he's still offering forgiveness for the ignorant, for the people that have no clue what they're doing. And so there's beautiful gospel in that, and I think we all have to remind ourselves of that. There's things that I need God to forgive me because I don't know why I'm making these choices, and And same for people, that this might just boil our blood. This might be one of those topics, I think, at the church, that it really makes us angry and we want to fight for life and all those things. But to have that posture of God forgave them even when they didn't know what they were doing, and so I was just reminded of that today as I was reading that Christ died for that person, for the person listening, for the person that, for me, for all of us, they're equal. The ground is equal at the foot of the cross. And so hopefully people find freedom and grace even in that message of the gospel. So I know I did as I was reading that today and had that reminder. So
well, what are some practical ways if people want to volunteer? Is there something that they can do to help make a difference if this is something they're also very passionate about? What did they go to your website, or are there other ways to?
Good question. Well, first and foremost, I would invite anyone who has not been to Assure to come in for a tour. It's one thing for me to talk about it. It's one thing for you to see on the website, but it's totally different for you to be in the building to see where the girls are walking. We actually hold a monthly tour ministry briefing the last Monday of every month from 6 to 7. It's an hour-long event. We keep our appointments are about an hour with the girls, and so I always tell them we won't keep you any longer than we keep our patients. So it's from 6 to 7 at the Sorensen office. That would be a great entry point. But they could also go to the website at firststeptolife.com and just type in, they want to volunteer, and someone will give them a call. But firststeptolife.com is a great place, but also to come in for one of those ministry briefings.
Toni, I just feel like you and your staff are just so amazing just for following this calling and doing something that I feel like is so close to God's heart. And I'm sure you guys are on the front lines every single day, and just there's a lot of heavy stuff that you guys are dealing with. What are some ways we can pray for you and your staff as you're going through these heavy things every week?
Good question. Thank you. I'd say, because of what we do, I think sometimes we feel like we have a target on our backs. And I know that's probably not the case, but it just seems like outside dealing with the day-to-day decisions that we know a young lady is going to have an abortion, outside that, it seems like we have a lot of personal family issues that going on, whether it's sickness or just things in our family that would tend to try to distract us from the work that God has called us to. So I would say, just our families that I hate to say it, like, they don't become a distraction, but there's sometimes some very strong, some very serious things that go on with our families as our staff and volunteers. And then, of course, that we are able to continue to love on the girls in spite of what we're dealing with in our personal lives, but that we not get complacent, that we not go, oh, here's another same old story, but that our hearts are always soft to that young lady. And I believe we are. I look at our volunteers. We have a tremendous staff, tremendous volunteers. And I don't believe that's the issue, but I think it's because we've girded ourselves with prayer. So that we don't become jaded, for lack of a better term, that we're tenderhearted, that we're looking at every young lady as just a soul that's lost and needs our help.
So good.
All right. Finally, are there any resources that you that people could get from your website or anything like that, like a blog or anything like that you could plug or share with people if they're just they just want to lurk, they don't want to reach out and contact you right yet?
Yeah, I would just say, once again, the website has all of our newsletters, not necessarily blogs, but some old newsletters, that kind of thing. It's a great place to go, firststeptolife.com.
All right, great. All right, anybody got anything else?
No, that's it. So,
do you have anything else you'd like to say before we?
Yeah, I guess I just thought about this too. We have an upcoming banquet April 2nd. It's a Thursday night. Jim Daly would be our speaker. That's our one big fundraiser of the year. We hope to see about 2,000 people, and I'll just tell you from standing on the stage, so to look at a room full of 2,000 people that are pro-life, that are for life, that are for families. It's just an amazing event that brings me great joy. It does good. It does us good to know that there are people that support what we do. And so if people are interested in coming out for that, once again, they could get that information at firststeptolife.com and come join us April 2nd as Jim Daly is our speaker that night.
All right, awesome.
And we'll timestamp that with 2020, just in case somebody's listening to this a little bit later, 2 years down the road. They're like, I don't see anything on this. So just so you know, if you're listening in 2025, it already happened 5 years ago.
You missed out on it.
But there's probably another one.
So look on the website. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you, Toni, for being here. Thanks for all your insight. I think it's valuable, and it's something that sometimes people, if they're not dealing with it on the day-to-day, it's one of those things that maybe you just don't think about. And so it's good information.
Yeah, it's an honor. Thanks.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Until next time, thanks, everybody, for being here. We'll talk to you then.